All right, let's keep the show going. Please welcome to the stage, Paul Heery.
I was 20 years old, and I found myself back at home living with my parents because I had just dropped out of college with only a semester left before graduation. To support myself, I wound up taking a full-time job working at Sam Goody's. On top of all that, I was driving an 8-year-old AMC Gremlin. Some explanations are in order here. For those in the room under 40, Sam Goody's was a chain of record stores. Records are what you kids today call vinyl. So one day at work, I noticed that there was a cute new trainee in the 45s department. 45s, small vinyl. I was checking the girl out, and she noticed and looked over at me, and our eyes met, and we locked on one another. It seemed to be for minutes, but I'm sure it was just seconds. But we both turned away, we felt a little embarrassed, and went back to our work. Now, at the time, I was pretty shy, still am, and I didn't have the guts to step up to her and introduce myself. So what I did is I strategically positioned myself to be working between the 45s department and the time clock, knowing that at some point she would have to go clock out to take a break. So a little later on, I saw her approaching, so I decided that I was going to go up and introduce myself. So I swallowed hard, went up, and said hello. She smiled and said to me, "Hi, I'm Andy." At that point, I locked in on her eyes, and we really just stared at one another, what seemed to be for about 10 minutes, but we truly had a moment. After that, we started taking breaks together, going out for lunch, and I got to a point where I was actually looking forward to going to work because Andy would be there. But I still didn't have the courage to ask her out. I knew that that was going to be the next step to go to a first date, but I needed to figure out how I could pull that one off. One day, the opportunity presented itself. There was going to be a party for my cousin who was in from the UK. So I went to Andy and I asked her, "Would you like to go to the party with me?" And she enthusiastically, without hesitation, said yes. Now let me tell you about the party. The party was because my cousin was being deported because of an outstanding marijuana offense in the UK. In my family, that was a good reason as any to have a party. So we're moving forward. I wanted to have a good first date, so I wanted everything to work out. She said yes, I was excited, but I was very anxious. On the day of the party, one of my coworkers, Carl, reminded me that I promised to drive him home that night. So I checked with Andy and said, "Andy, you okay with this?" She said, "Yeah, that's fine, we can drop Carl off." So after work, the three of us go walking out to head out so we can drop Carl off and go to the party. Walking to the car, it started to rain. Now, I mentioned that I was driving a Gremlin at the time. If you're not familiar with Gremlins, they were probably the worst car ever made. And they all had their own quirks. My car, one of its quirks was that spontaneously things would stop working, and the windshield wipers were one of them. So we got to the car, and I asked Andy to get into the back seat. She looked at me questioningly, and because I said, "Carl needs to be in the front seat so he can work the windshield wipers in the event that they stop working." So we take off, the rain starts coming down much harder. Carl is doing a good job, but it's not long until he is completely soaked from the waist up because he's leaning out around the windshield, grabbing the windshield wipers and moving them back and forth when they need to happen. So I'm thinking, this is not going to work out too well if I ask Andy to take over after we drop Carl off. So I came up with a plan that I would stop by and get my dad's Ford. The Ford was nothing special, but the windshield wipers worked. We got my dad's car. Andy jumps in the front seat this time. Carl goes in the back. and we drop him off. After we drop Carl off, Andy slides across the big bench seat in the front of the Ford, cuddles up next to me, looks up to me, pauses for a second, and says, "We could have taken my car." From there, we drove to the party. There was another thing that I hadn't planned on that was really going to get in the way of being a perfect date. She was going to meet members of my family. My brother was a stand-up comedian. My sister was an actress. And my cousin was a fugitive. So the party worked out well. The conversations were very lively. And at the end of it, we're driving back. I'm taking Andy back to her place. And she says, "That was fun. I had a lot of fun there. That was great." So at that point, I knew that something could happen here. Andy and I were together for 44 years until she passed away last February after a 6-year battle with cancer. Not a day goes by where I don't consider that had I not dropped out of college, I never would have met the love of my life. Thank you.
Give it up for Paul.